Welcome to session 2, everybody. I want, as a way of like just getting us settled into the session today, I'd love for everybody to give one word or a phrase that helps describe how you're coming to the session today, how you're feeling, emotionally, physically, anything that comes up. Just drop that in the chat. Get started. Overwhelmed. Open. I like that, Christine. Stacy, what is overwhelmed? Do you want to talk about it?
Oh, it's just all the stuff I have to do today for work and personally, things I need to get together.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm glad you're here, and a lot of people could skip out on this, but I appreciate you being here. So, scattered, busy, tired. Oh, oral surgery, Katie. Oof. I get that. A lot of busy, scattered. Just had there's a book I'm reading right now called Scattered Minds, that's about ADHD and how that shows up in the world. And so there's a lot of stuff that's in my mind. So thank you everybody for sharing that how you're showing up today. It's important to kind of like touch in from time to time. All right, let me see. I'm going to share the screen here. Okay, I think y'all can see it now. So our session last time, we talked about, I'll talk to you about that in a second, just to get us going for the day today. Just a reminder of our community agreements. We went over that last time, but each time I bring it up, I'll pick out one of the agreements that I want to like reinforce. And I think today, what's going to be important for our conversation is bring an open heart and curious mind to our interactions, because we're going to do a couple of different activities today that is going to be focusing and going deeper into our own identities and what shows up in our world and asking the question why. So that's what we're going to be talking about. When in the session last time, we talked about our empathic ability. This time we're talking about our empathy deficit, and the next time we're going to be talking about learning empathy for change. These last 3 sessions actually correspond to the 3 parts of the book. Sorry, I'm having like allergy problems. So I wanted to start the session today. I know a number of you hadn't had a chance to do the empathy quiz in our session last time, and so that was like homework for the session today, for today. So wanted to just open up for a few minutes to see if anybody wanted to share what came up. I think Christine, you had said that you had done it previously, and you might want to share a couple things. So pick one of these, read over these questions, pick 1 or 2, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. You can put it in the chat, or you can even put it in, raise your hand, or go off of mute and speak up.
I'll just speak up real quickly. I have to find it. So I'm going to go off camera while I find it. I'll everybody
Sounds
right
good.
now. Sorry.
That's okay. Stacy, I want to hear from you. Go ahead.
I will say that I was not shocked by my results, only because, being a nurse and working in the ER for most of my career, you have to have a lot of empathy. And so my score was high, which also obviously it says can increase my personal distress because I can take other people's feelings on. So, and that does occur as well. So I was not shocked by my results at all when I read that I had a pretty high empathy score. So
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Stacy. I think I think this group here, given that you all are either come from healthcare, from nursing, or are supporting nursing nurses, and in the roles that you're in, you probably will score pretty high, from what I can tell. But that doesn't mean there's a lot of things that has to do with empathy, and we're just focused on ourselves right now, but we'll go deeper into what we see around us. So thank you, Stacy, for sharing.
I
And
can't
also,
find my hand to raise.
oh yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah, normally I know where it is. Because I don't want to interrupt anybody.
It's
Oh,
in
it's being
reaction.
blocked by something. I
On
found
the
it.
bottom, it has this thing, it's called reaction. And if you
Right.
click on that, one of the options is to, I think is reaction or a hand, you can
It-
raise your hand.
It is reaction, and I was looking for it, couldn't find it. It's because I
Oh,
had
good.
a smaller screen thing going on. I didn't realize.
Oh, it's okay, Lee. You're here.
Anyway, sorry. So I'm hoping I'm not talking over anyone because I did mean
No
to,
worries.
but I can't find my results at the moment. But it's interesting. Again, high empathy score. I am definitely one of those. If you're crying, I'm going to cry. If
Mhm.
you're happy, I'm going to be happy. I mean, I take on those. I'm emotive anyway, and so I'll take on other people's emotions and stuff like that. What I
Mm.
found interesting, and it's no surprise to what Stacy said, wasn't surprised. A lot of times when I was taking the the quiz about listening to others' perspectives and that kind of stuff, it's like in the back of my mind, I'm always like, it depends. I'm always putting like, it depends. And
Right.
and even when my thing came up and said I have a high empathy score, one things I can work on is active listening, which is 100% true. When I'm very good about it if it's not something that I am just really have such a strong feeling about. But if I have a
Mhm.
strong feeling about something, I find that my active listening skills are challenged. So,
Mhm.
and that's
Mhm.
when you need it the most. And that is when you need it the most. So I think there's something about what do you want to take? What areas do you want to improve? Definitely that active, so cognitive, I would say. I think the effective part I'm okay about, but the cognitive part of just really actively listening when it's such an emotional or uh, uh, visceral opinion or whatever is where I need to work on.
Hmm. Interesting insights, Lee. I love that. Especially when we're scattered. Some people said that they're scattered, they are overwhelmed in the session today. And Jeremy, I see your hand, I'll get to you in a second. Is the idea of like if we're overwhelmed, cognitive empathy kind of goes out the window because we're not able to be there and take somebody's perspective. We might be feeling their feelings because of this thing called empathic resonance, where our nervous systems actually resonate with each other in this kind of like interesting system that we've got going on. But our cognitive, we're not able to hear the message and hear their perspective. So that's really interesting insights, Lee. Jeremy, what do you got to say?
So I was similar in the active listening piece. Certainly if I'm engaged and something's got me, I'm there. But if it's, not something that really grabs me or something just goes completely sideways, sometimes it's hard for, I get lost in that a little bit. I'm not a, an in the weeds kind of person. I don't reflect what other people have emotionally. Like Lee said, if somebody's crying, it's like, oh, I may kind of go that way. So I don't do that. While I can feel what people have going on, I can empathize, I can sympathize. I'm not a crier. I try to, I hate to say try, but I think it was the way I was raised, right? I try not to show too many emotions on the surface, at least not with people that I don't know well. Certainly, you can let the barrier down a little bit with people you're more comfortable with or people you know.
Right.
But my score was 90 something. So it wasn't low. I didn't get the results and be like, oh my God, what's going
Get
on?
100%, yeah.
And I think a lot of that goes back to, almost all of us on the call here are nurses, and it's kind of part of the gig, right? When you work in a hospital setting, an acute care setting, maybe ambulatory, whatever your background is, I think it makes you better at your job when you can meet people where they're at.
Mhm.
But I always kind of kept it very flat, I guess you
Surface
could say.
level, yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Jeremy. I think there's lots of like nuggets in there that I love. Of like it sounds like you have awareness, that you're you have some similarities with Lee, and that you might not be able to take somebody's perspective. The conditioning that you've received in your life of like not showing emotion, and also the conditioning received from our larger society is also saying don't be emotional, that's not a don't talk, don't trust, and don't feel these things. So love that explanation, Jeremy. So I'm gonna go into the next phase. Christine or anyone else, if you want to, if you want to share your score, any kind of reflections you have after taking that test, please share it in the chat. Happy to do that. I have to move on because I've got 2 other activities for us today, and I want to get us out on a good at a good time. So
The only thing I would say,
yeah.
The only thing I would say is that one thing I think is a test taking piece. I don't often go on extremes. And so most of mine were like agree or disagree. I don't choose those outside extremes. So I felt that maybe that had an impact on the score. I would say I was very high, but with a high score, but I suspect I thought it was actually lower than I thought it would be, but I think it's because of the way I answered quizzes and tests and Likert scale. I'm not one to choose the
right.
over the top answers.
Right.
So part of it
Yeah,
is test taking, but I got great suggestions.
Oh, good. I'm glad that can be of help to you. And thank you for saying that, because I think that in some form or fashion, when we do a test, it's self-reporting. And people around us might actually reflect and say something different. You might not be as empathetic as you think you are. So that's actually one of the limitations for one of the major studies that has been mentioned over and over and over again. It's actually, I think it's in the first chapter of my book where it talks about our empathy deficit, is that it's a longitudinal study that looks at from like the 1980s until the early 2000s of self-reported empathy and from college students. And so, it's an interesting study that is done longitudinally, not longitudinally, all right, in a longitudinal way. And so it's a lot of it self-reporting. So, we can keep that in mind as we reflect on these things. So, empathy rising. Let's talk a little bit about the stakes that are coming up for us. We're already starting to feel in our own lives some of the implications as we see a lack of empathy or a challenging experiences in our lives. So, just to kind of return to the definition, the simplest definition, and this comes from Dr. Brene Brown, is talking about, if you've seen that little animation that she does, and she's done an animation on like, what is sympathy versus empathy, a lot of people refer to. And empathy is feeling with someone rather than for them. And so, later on in the book, you'll see that I have this sense of if we're in a place where we need to have empathy for each other in an individual level, we also need to design organizations and society in a way that we're designing with each other rather than for other people. So there's a lot of power dynamics in there. So I think of empathy as this like magic wand that we all have within ourselves, and we need to cultivate if we choose to do that. And so it is key to many discussions on leadership and society. It helps us to have compassion for each other. It helps build connections internally with ourselves and others. It also helps us to process intense emotions, manage stress, and mitigate bias. And in business, we're able to do creativity and innovation a little bit better if we start taking perspective with each other. Essentially, empathy is a first step in the human-centered design process in when we're trying to design with each other. Also, it helps to increase collaboration, makes us better negotiators. And then on a larger scale, we're able to be more effective and motivate others to action. And then other people are allowed to feel heard in the moment. And it also provides like this bond between teams and communities. And the words on the screen here is like, I really feel like my empathy, my being a highly sensitive person allows me to sense the world in different ways that other people can. And so, empathy at the end of the day and compassion are really connected to how do we care for each other in community. You all know this, you're nurses or nurse adjacent. I did a lot of this work with the Director of National Intelligence and the 17 intelligence agencies. The conversations we were having just a minute ago did not show up a lot in Director of National Intelligence folks. And that's a whole nother conversation for a different day for talking about national intelligence, but doing empathy work in national intelligence, very different than doing it in a nursing situation. But the underlying need is the same. So the 3 components of empathy we went over last week: head, cognitive empathy; heart, which is affective empathy or emotional empathy; and the hand is compassionate empathy. It's actually how we take action in the world. And in this chapter, we also talked about, I've been the director of innovation in many situations, but I've also seen a lot of different things at the end of the day, and I don't like the word innovation. I am more keen on change, but at the end of the day, it's putting empathy into action. Those 3 components, the head, the heart, and the hand, is how do we take this work and put it into action into the world, is really what I envision in the world. And over the past few decades of studying empathy and change efforts, I feel like we're really at a crossroads. At the end of the day, we're either leaning into empathy or we're leaning out of it. There's a little bit on that spectrum there. And one of the amazing people I interviewed for this book is called Antoinette Carroll. She's the CEO, president, and founder of this organization called the Creative Reaction Lab. She created an entire model called the Equity-Centered Community Design Framework. She actually is teaching people with living experience or lived experience to design the world around them and to help combat systemic racism. And she's just an amazing human. And she actually said that she's in the process of building cathedrals. So in the sense of like systemic racism won't be changed within our time, but it might be changed in a few lifetimes from now. And so the work that she's doing is laying the foundation for that work. And she says that at the end of the day, that systems of oppression have been designed, so we must redesign them. And so that's the heart of the Creative Reaction Lab. And when I talked to her, she said, this is what's at stake. If we don't have empathy, we have trauma and negative systemic impact. But if we infuse empathy in our work, it will create safety, confidence, power, and impact at the end of the day. So like 2 ends of the spectrum, if you will. And then a lot of people are talking about centering design and the work that we do on living with each other than for them. And Stephen Chang, I was speaking at the Code for America Summit, and I had a lovely panel discussion where we had Stephen Chang from the National Equity Project here, and he says that we need to really interrupt our ingrained ways of thinking and acting, especially when it comes to designing new programs, new services, and just doing the day-to-day work. And there's unintended consequences that come out. And so Stephen said, we have a history of discrimination within our country, which has been institutionalized into our systems. We must recognize how deeply ingrained and structured that is in our society and how it's held in place. And this is the thing we need to interrupt. And he said in our talk that the way we can overcome that kind of cruelty is empathy. And when we see our humanity in someone else, it's very hard for us not to care for each other. So this part is not in the book because it's just something that came up in the 3 years since I wrote this book. But there's a lot of people having lots of conversations around that. So that leads me to our activity that we're doing. That's just a little bit of kind of like overview for those who weren't able to necessarily read it, but it's kind of laying the foundation for what we're going to be talking about today. So the first stepping stone in this journey is to build awareness. And you started to build awareness a little bit with taking that test, seeing you rate pretty high in empathy. But we're also going to be doing a little bit more stepping into ourselves. And Sheryl Sandberg actually is pointing to this really great feeling that we can have, or this mindset we can have, is building awareness. As awareness is the greatest agent for change. Sorry about that. You're probably having empathy for me as I'm coughing. And I just have this drink in front of me, so give me a second. So very few people at the end of the day takes time to do the introspection that self-awareness, but awareness begins with really knowing ourselves. And once we quiet down our minds and are able to focus, we also see that things are starting to change around us. And so if we don't do the work of awareness at the end of the day, we end up being changed by the circumstances around us, and rather than being agents in our own transformation process. So one of the things that we use in design and in this work is starting with this, what we call positionality. And it's coming over two different elements. Is that who are you and what is your lens at which you see the world? So we are all very complex people with different identities, and we identify in many different ways, different roles, professions, hobbies, etc. And then all of our identities, our lived experiences, our realities, influence how you perceive the world around us. And all of us, all of these things really becomes a lens through which everything is filtered in the world. And there's a lot of power that we have in that lens, but we can actually shift our, understand that positionality to have that awareness of why it's showing up. And then we're able to then, like Sheryl Sandberg says, once you have that awareness, you can change and evolve to be a more empathetic human at the end of the day. And so positionality at the end of the day looks at who you are as a person and then sets the lens through which you look at the world. And I've been doing some work with this organization called the Inheritance Project that really does look deeply into this work. And we are shaped by our inheritance, what we've inherited from our society, from our lineage, from our identities that we have. This activity we're about to do is going to be is a much shorter version of a longer training. So I'm just giving you a taste of what this is. And so positionality is that social and political context that creates our identity. And then also how your identity influences and biases your perception of an outlook on the world. So there's lots of different identities we're going to go into, and I'm going to drop in the chat for us to do. So, ready for an activity? Let's do it. So, this is a very bright and colorful rendition of what is called the identity wheel. And we're going to look at our different identities that have shaped us. For example, when I look at my family's origin story as a first generation to go to college, it shaped my reality because it was hard for me to find my way through college and beyond, because these experiences were I'm the first in my family to do and experience that. So we're going to take, and if you can open a notes app on your computer, or if you have a binder or a note, some paper in front of you and a pencil or pen, we're going to do some reflection on these, and you can just write them down in a list. So what we're going to be doing, and I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to do this, is to go around with each element in here. And I'm also going to drop in the chat for you. There is a lot of core and internal dimensions, and also other secondary or external dimensions that show up for you. So you can choose your own adventure with this. You don't have to fill out every single one. But just reflect for a little bit on these different elements. And then there's 4 questions in the center here. I'm going to keep this up for you so that you can see them. But the 4 questions in there is what we're going to be reflecting on as a group right when we're done with this. So let me drop this in the chat for you. So, and if you want to, you can go ahead and get started on that. If you're a person, drop that in the chat. I think this. So I'm going to put the timer on in a minute, but I'm just going to drop this in the chat to so you can see the lots of different identities that show up for us. Is that clear for everybody? Does anybody have any questions? Why is this not? Okay. All right. Well, trying to post it. Oh, Stacy, sorry. I'm trying to post it, but it's not posting. So give me
That's okay.
Yeah. Question.
So I was, I swear sometimes I feel like a dunce. I just wanted to kind of clarify.
Okay.
So we're answering the questions that are on the screen.
Yeah, so you are
virtual
looking at each piece. So different elements. So look at, like, for example, ethnicity. What ethnicity do you identify? Like this is this is your pieces of your own identity. Where is your socioeconomic status maybe when you were a child to where you are today? For example, I lived in a trailer when I grew up, and now I'm in like middle class, right? And that's a very different mindset that shows up, gender, etc. So does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay,
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Lee, yeah. What do you think?
You're on mute.
Can't hear you.
Kind of take on to Stacy because I'm not. So it looks like we're going to go into each of these and just kind of see where we fall. But those are different than what these questions are in the middle. So are we supposed to do those questions too, or we're going to get to those questions?
We're going to get to those questions. So we're going to do everything around the circle right now, reflect on those, and then we're going to discuss as a group these identities that we can have. So I'm going to give you a minute or two to reflect on that. So let's just start with, like, what are the various identities that make up who we are? Does that explain things for you?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, I'm gonna drop this in here so you can see it all. Okay, we have about a minute left and I'll bring you back. So you don't have to finish all the things around the circle, but let's just get a little bit of a start. Then if you're done, you can also put in the chat that you're done, ready to move on. Okay. Okay, so let's for this moment, I'm going to give you a minute to then, now that you've, oh, sorry. Now that you've actually gone through and looked at these identities that you have, I want you to take a minute to look at all the identities that you have and ask yourself the questions, those 4 questions that are in the circle. What are the ones you think about most often, or maybe even the least often out there? And what is something you might want to learn more about? And I think an important question is also, which one has the strongest effect on how you see yourself as a person as well? So let's reflect a little bit for a minute. Okay. Mm. All right, let's bring it back, and I'm going to turn off the sharing so that we can get a couple folks to share some of their reflections that they have with these 4 questions. I'm going to drop the 4 questions in the chat for us so we can have them handy. Okay, does anybody have anything to share? Whether it's identities that show up the most or the least, what are something that makes you more curious out there?
Okay, I can get the ball rolling. Oh, good, Stacy. She raised her hand.
Welcome to you, Christina.
Thank you.
To my hand because nobody else was talking.
I was wondering I was waiting everybody out.
Like in that awkward moment. Thank you, Stacy. Yeah. Stacy, you first, and then Christine.
So I don't know. When I looked at everything, like, I don't know if anything's really changed from, like from earlier. Well, earlier in my life, not like earlier today. But I mean, I definitely think about, my age a lot because of, us getting older and things changing and like that. I don't think about you know, where I came from or anything like that. I'm very curious though about like that I have Scottish and Irish. But so I'm very curious about that. I don't feel, where are the questions? See, which of these are the strongest effect on how I see myself as a person? So I mean, I definitely, the physical emotional development aspect is definitely the identities that really affect who I am as a person, how I feel, how I feel about others, and how I feel about myself. And how I am as that I have a family now, that's changed, being married compared to obviously when I'm younger. And that whole dynamic, and then going back to school and uh getting my master's degree, and what that's done for me, for my professional life as well. So did I answer those questions correctly? See, I'm the first person and all y'all are like looking to me like, okay, how's she
Like,
answering?
what do we do?
Uh,
Yeah, that's great, Stacy. I think I like that you brought that thread through all the other identities of like what was I like a child? And that shapes your identity in a big way. We do that a lot in like my burnout coaching and burnout work of like, what did we do as a child? We bring that into our adulthood. So that's some great reflection, Stacy. Thank you.
And I can tell you, I never thought I was gonna go back to school and like get my master's degree when I was younger. I thought, especially when I was a younger nurse, like I got my associate's degree and I thought that's where I was gonna be a bedside nurse for the rest of my life. And
Mm.
I never thought I would
Mm.
go back to school and get my master's and continue that way.
Mm.
So
Yeah, that's actually a great point because it shows that we're always continually changing. And so like, similar to my sister when she was younger, she was like, I'm not having kids. When she got married, she's not having kids. And then 10 years later, she's like, I want to have kids now, right? Like we can change our minds and choose different things. So yes, thank you, Stacy. Christine, what do you have to say?
Well, it's very similar to Stacy's comments. I would say right off the bat, though, to answer number one, I was immediately drawn to the physical emotional development of ability. I mean, for various reasons that we don't have enough time to talk about, but from my childhood rearing, from all the traveling I did, from my family, exposure to the military, to my life as a career military officer and nurse, and I mean, all of that, it's always been about physical, emotional, and developmental ability to cope and also to perform. So it's always been about doing all those things. And the thing that the identities you think least often, I'm very similar to Stacy in that it was the items, the national origin, first language, race, ethnicity, gender, and sexual orientation. I mean, all of that just was me. And I never really spent much time thinking about it. I just took me as I was. Because that's what my parents, they said, I would always complain that I wasn't this or I wasn't that. And then I was constantly getting the message, Christine, you're fine just the way you are. That's good. And we talk about the way I was and everything, it was good. So as long as I wasn't hurting anybody or physically or emotionally, I was on the right track. Number three, some of your own identities that you would like to, ethnicity. I'm Irish, French, and right down the middle. And so I learned a lot about my French side growing up. French was my first language, so I knew a lot about that, but not a lot about the Irish side. So I really would be curious to find out just what characteristics of the Irish, are inside of me. And then the identities that have the strongest effect on how you see yourself as a person. I would say number one, the physical, emotional development piece, but also very strongly the religion and spiritual affiliation. And again, that's a whole other story in and of itself. But
Yeah,
those are my answers.
thank you, Christine. I think that what you were embedding in there is like you were like there's so many stories, like it's a story within a story of your entire life, but then we've got all different stories, and identities are almost like a story that we're telling ourselves based on that identity. And also like recognizing that there we do have a story that made us who we are today, and obviously we don't have time to share that with this group. And if this was a different group where it was like, let's talk about like, just an identity group, and that conversation, we could do that for like a long time and really go deep into identity setting and reflection.
That's the work of a retreat.
What did you say? It's a work of a
retreat.
Oh, right. Yes. Where we're all like together and we're going deeper and getting to know each other more. Yes, for sure. Thank you, Christine. Because I promised that I would get us out at a reasonable time today for transitions, based on Doreen suggested that I do that. There's a block of information that I have today that I wasn't really able to go over because we did have we had a conversation about the the quiz we just took. There is a yeah, thank you, Lee, and Chris, and thank you for Stacy and Christine for sharing. I'm sure we've all got our own stories there. But I'm going to share my screen for 1 second, and I'm going to do this as a bonus in section for you. I might do a recording. I might just turn it into a paper for you all. I'm just going to show just the visuals here. There's a piece here that we didn't really get to talk about today, where it's like our collective empathy deficit. How did we get here? Now we're moving from their individual worlds to what do we see around us? And we talked about the individual, and then we also talk about the collective. So I'm just going to just do quick overview here. And this is the characteristics of our culture. This is a lot of work that has been done for 20 or 30 years to really look at how our culture is shaping our identities, and shaping us and conditioning us to be a certain way. So I will, like I said, I will follow up with like a short explanation of all these things, and a quick activity reflection on the empathy deficit we've seen. What do we think is happening? And, you know, I have the last activity I usually do in groups is to look at our company or organization, what's showing up, and in our society, what's showing up out of those things. So that's going to be following up, and a little bit of a sprinkle of like, how did we get here to begin with? I love history, and I like to understand the past so that we can understand the present, right? So looking back on the past, understand the present. So I'll put that in a little document to send over to you all, and give you some space. If you want to, I will stay on and have a chat. Like I had a lovely chat with some of the somebody who stayed on last week for like a good 15-20 minutes to talk about change management. So yeah, I'm happy to talk about anything under the sun. So for our next session, April 2nd, is reading part 2 of Empathy for Change, is 2 or 3 hours. This one might take a little bit longer because there's a lot of content in that, but just, you know, depending on how fast you read, that's the information we send on. And I'll follow up with an email. Doreen said that I can email all of you with information. So with that, thank you for being here again, everyone. I did it with like 3 minutes. I feel proud of myself to make sure I give you that time and energy to start seeing things. And I hope in this session that you were able to do a little reflection on like what came up in that quiz that you did, but also with the identity wheel, understanding our identities, how that's showing up, and that shows the lens through which we're looking at the world, right? And so that's from an individual context, and there's a little bit more learning around how does the world around us shape who we are. So anyway, thank you so much for being here. I'll be around and answer any questions. So see you
Thank
next 2 weeks.
Thank you.